The village of Aji streamed out like a necklace of clay huts across the red earth, cupped gently by the shadows of the great forest that rose beyond its edges. Every morning, the mist crawled out of the trees and settled like a hush over the roofs, and every evening, it slithered back in, carrying the day's stories with it. People here believed in words the way others believed in gods. A spoken promise was as binding as rope. A song could mend wounds that palm oil could not. To be voiceless in Aji was to be soulless. And to possess a voice unlike any other was to be both revered and feared. Anaya was born during the river season, when the swollen waters lapped against the roots of the forest and the rains sang for days. The midwife who delivered her claimed the baby did not cry, she hummed. A soft, melodic sound like wind chimes heard underwater. People laughed at the tale then, dismissing it as the exaggeration of old age, but when Anaya turned 5 and healed her sister's broken arm with a lullaby, no one laughed anymore. They whispered instead. They called her River Blessed, a child touched by the River Mother, the ancient spirit believed to dwell at the confluence where the village's stream met the deeper forest waters. Her voice, it was said, was not entirely her own. When someone fell ill they called Anaya. She would sit by the mat, hum softly, then let the song rise from her throat like water from a spring. And slowly the fever would break. Wounds would close faster when her voice lingered in the air. Mothers began storing her songs in calabashes the way they stored palm wine. A whisper of her tune at a burial soothed the grieving. She became the village's blessing, but also its mystery. Though loved, Anaya lived with a distance wrapped around her like a shawl. Children her age, who wrestled in the dust and chased goats down the slope, would pause when she walked by. Some would smile, others would not meet her eyes. One boy whispered once that she wasn't really human. Another said her voice could trap souls. Her mother scolded them when she heard, but the damage lingered in the silence that followed Anaya wherever she went. Still, Anaya remained gentle. She loved listening more than speaking, and often sat by the riverbank, toes dipped in water, eyes closed, as if the breeze was telling her secrets. She spoke to birds, sang to trees, and gave names to the wind. Her world was not loud, but it was deep. And it was in this quiet depth that she felt most herself. The elders of the village watched her with both awe and concern. They knew the forest's appetite for magic. It had taken others before. Children who glowed too brightly, people who asked the wrong questions or gave too much of themselves to things they didn't understand. The forest, they believed, was not merely trees and shadows. It was alive, old, and listening. It kept stories in its roots and secrets in its mist. Never wander past the river bend, her grandmother warned one evening, shelling groundnuts by the fire. That is where the breath of the world grows thin. Where you might speak and never hear yourself again. But what's there beyond the bend? Anaya had asked, chin on her knees. The part of the world where the living and the forgotten meet, the old woman said, cracking a nut between her teeth. Where the forest listens harder than it should. Some warnings were gentler, like that of Elder Tobe, who had once been a great singer himself before age stole his strength. He pulled Anaya aside one day, after a festival where she had sung the skies clear of rain. Your voice, he said, eyes misty with things not spoken, is a bridge. A gift like that crosses places others can't reach. But bridges swing both ways, child. Never let your voice walk where your feet have not been invited. Anaya nodded then, half understanding, the way young ones do when spoken to in riddles. But the words stayed with her, tucked under her ribs like a seed waiting for rain. To her, the forest wasn't frightening. It was beautiful. The way it breathed, the way it shimmered with light and shadow, the way its trees bent like they were listening. She had never stepped beyond the river bend, but she had dreamed of it often. Of a fig tree with roots shaped like fingers. Of a voice calling to her not with words, but with rhythm. A hum that felt familiar, like something she'd once sung in another life. Perhaps, if the village had not feared the forest so much, she would have asked someone to go with her. Perhaps, if they had seen her as a girl instead of a gift, she would have spoken her dreams aloud. But instead, she kept her curiosity quiet, folded it between the verses of her songs and waited. Waited for the day she might learn what waited on the other side of her voice. It was mid-morning when Anaya set out alone, the dew still clinging to the long grass and the distant call of a hornbill echoing through the air. A child from the village had fallen ill, burning with a fever that would not break. Anaya had tried singing over her the night before, but something deeper resisted. The child's mother, desperate and weeping, had whispered of a plant, a koro, a rare herb that grew near the base of the forest where sunlight barely reached. Only the elders ever gathered it, and only with prayers. Anaya knew they wouldn't risk going now. Not so close to the river bend. Not with omens in the air. So she went quietly, telling only her mother that she was going to the hills to think. She wore a simple wrapper and tied her herbs basket across her back. Around her neck hung a smooth river stone for protection, and in her mind she repeated Elder Tobe's warnings like a rhythm. Don't let your voice walk where your feet have not been invited. But the sick girl's shallow breaths echoed louder. The forest changed quickly once she passed the village's outer farms. The air thickened as if wrapped in another kind of silence, not the stillness of peace but of something watching. The canopy blocked most of the sunlight, and the earth grew softer under her feet. Her fingers brushed over leaves slick with dew and old magic. Birds did not sing here. The trees creaked gently, not from wind but from memory. As she walked deeper, she felt the sensation of being followed, not by footsteps but by gazes too old to name. She murmured small songs to herself, protective ones passed down from her grandmother. She didn't dare sing aloud. Not yet. Not here. Then, just beyond a veil of hanging moss, she saw it, the sacred fig tree. Its roots curled up from the ground like reaching hands, thick and dark with age. The villagers called it Omo Orin, child of the heavens, and said it had been growing since before the forest had a name. Beneath its crooked branches lay something out of place. A shape. A body. Anaya's breath caught. A man sprawled on the forest floor, his chest rising shallowly. His skin was the color of ash and clay, streaked with blood and dust. Deep gashes tore across his arms and his clothes were tattered, soaked through. There were bruises shaped like fingers around his throat. She stood frozen. Everything in her screamed to run. The elders were clear. Never help the forest's wounded. They might not belong to the world of the living. But his mouth trembled and his eyes fluttered open, catching hers. There was pain in them. But also something deeper, something that shimmered just beneath his gaze, unreadable and strange. Her heart beat louder than the birds. Still she stepped forward. I will help you, she whispered, though he didn't answer. Kneeling beside him, she laid her hand on his chest and drew in a breath. She didn't need words to sing. The melody slipped from her like smoke, soft and low. A healing rhythm born from her mother's lullabies and her own heart's pulse. She poured her fear into it, her doubt, her longing to do good. The notes curled around the man like vines. His breathing steadied. The bleeding slowed. Anaya closed her eyes, letting the song guide her. She felt something shift beneath her palm, not just flesh knitting together but something older being disturbed, like stirring water at the bottom of a well. When she opened her eyes again, he was staring at her. Too alert. Too awake. His body sat up slowly, far too quickly for someone who had just been half dead. The wounds were gone, replaced by pale, unbroken skin. His face looked younger now and older too, smooth like carved wood, yet his eyes were the color of a storm. He smiled at her. Not kindly. Not cruelly. Just knowingly. He said softly. Thank you. But the way he spoke the words, it wasn't the tongue of her people. It was older, cracked with time. A dialect only heard in river chants and funeral drums. Then, as quickly as breath between syllables, he vanished. Not with a flash or sound. One moment he was there. The next, only the empty air remained. No footsteps, no broken branches. Just silence. And a faint smell of ash. Anaya scrambled back, her knees trembling, her voice caught in her throat. She scanned the trees, the roots, the path she had taken, but found no trace of him. Her heart raced, but her breath slowed. She wasn't hurt. Nothing had touched her. Her voice was still hers. But something had changed. She could feel it. Still clutching her basket, she stood, backing away from the tree. The forest didn't seem to watch anymore. It simply waited. She looked once more at the base of the fig tree, then turned and left, singing no more than a whisper of song to guide her home. She told no one what she had seen. Not the child's mother. Not her own. Not even Elder Tobe. Let them believe she had found the herbs, crushed the roots, and sung as always. Let them believe the forest had not taken notice. But in the deepest part of her, Anaya knew the truth. She had crossed the bend. And something there had listened. That night, the sky changed its skin. Clouds rolled in thick and low, swallowing the stars one by one until the heavens looked like bruised stone. A hot wind swept through Aji, rustling the palm fronds with a warning breath. The village dogs howled, then fell strangely quiet. Then the rain came, not the soft blessing of the river season, but a violent sideways torrent that slapped the rooftops and churned the red earth to mud. Thunder cracked like the sky had torn its own voice open. In the distance, the river moaned, a long, low sound that rose like a cry too ancient to name. Anaya lay restless beneath her raffia mat, her skin prickling despite the heat. Her thoughts returned again and again to the man under the fig tree. She hadn't spoken his name because she didn't know it. Hadn't told anyone because something inside her, some seed of instinct, told her not to. Still, his eyes haunted her, that shimmer like still water hiding teeth underneath. She closed her own eyes, willing sleep to come. It didn't. She awoke with a start. Not to noise but to silence. The storm had paused. The village slept. Even the river had stopped moaning. Then a whisper of wind brushed past her window and she turned her head. He was there. Standing just outside the wooden slats, half shadow and half form, his pale skin glowing softly in the dark. Rain dripped from his shoulders though she heard no footsteps. His eyes met hers again and this time they held no pain. Only possession. She tried to sit up, but her body froze as he stepped forward. The door remained closed. Yet he entered as if it weren't there. His feet didn't make a sound on the ground. The air around him shifted, like heat rising off fire. "You healed me," he said, his voice low, curling like smoke in her ears. "You brought me back. That was not yours to give." Anaya couldn't move. Her heartbeat filled her skull. She wanted to scream but the sound stuck just beneath her tongue. He crouched beside her mat, head tilted like a curious bird. "You gave me life," he murmured, tracing a finger through the air. "Now give me your breath." Her mouth opened. She let out a cry but it was stolen before it escaped. No sound came, just air raw and empty. Panic seized her. She clutched her throat. It burned as if marked by fire beneath the skin. Her breath came in shallow gasps, but no song followed, no syllable, not even a sob. He smiled wider. "There. Now we are bound," he said, reaching up to brush a strand of hair from her face. She flinched. His touch was cold and weightless. "You will understand, in time." She bolted from her mat, crashing into a stool, stumbling toward the door. She flung it open and ran into the rain. Her feet slapped through mud and puddles as she darted into the open yard, the wind lashing her face. Her voice, she needed her voice. Her hands clawed at her throat, then tried to form signs. Anything. But her mouth opened and closed like a fish pulled from water, useless, desperate. She screamed again. Nothing. Not even the smallest sound. Behind her, a laugh echoed, thin and dry like rustling leaves in the dry season. She turned. He stood in the doorway still, not chasing, not moving, just watching. The wind around him howled louder than the storm. His figure shimmered once and then he was gone. Dispersed like dust on wind. Anaya collapsed to her knees, trembling, rain soaking her night wrapper, hair clinging to her cheeks. Her mother's shout pierced the storm as she ran from the hut, followed by her father and younger brother. They found her there in the courtyard on the ground and shaking. Her mouth opened again and again, but only sobs came, and even those were silent. They rushed to her, cradled her, carried her back inside. Her mother wept, asking what had happened. Her father lit the sacred oil lamp. But all Anaya could do was shake her head and point uselessly at her throat. They brought her charcoal and papyrus leaf. Her fingers, still slick with water, struggled to form words. She tried to draw a tree, a figure, a face, but her hand shook too much, her thoughts scrambled. The marks made no sense. Just black shapes curling into confusion. Her mother cupped her cheeks. "Who did this to you, my child?" But Anaya couldn't answer. Couldn't hum, couldn't whisper, couldn't shape even the smallest song. And deep inside, something told her it wasn't just her voice that had been taken. It was her power. Her story. Her name in the wind. And whoever he was, he hadn't come just to take. He had come to claim. At dawn, the storm passed, but its echo lingered in the bones of the village. The sky was washed clean, yet no one smiled. The chickens clucked uneasily, the goats bleated in short bursts, and the river gurgled with a voice no one trusted anymore. Word spread faster than fire in Harmattan. Anaya had lost her voice. The people of Aji, who revered speech as sacred, who believed the voice was the breath of the soul, did not know what to do with her silence. To lose one's voice, not through age or illness but suddenly, unnaturally, was not just misfortune. It was a rupture in the order of things. They did not need to hear her story to sense that this was not a sickness of the throat but something else, something darker. The child she had been trying to heal, little Needy, the girl with the burning fever, worsened that morning. Anaya sat beside her again, hands trembling, throat straining to release even the softest hum. But nothing came. No melody, no rhythm. Her mouth opened and closed in vain. The music that once flowed effortlessly through her was gone, hollowed out like a gourd left in the sun too long. When the child died by evening, the silence felt like a verdict. The mother's wails cut through the village like knives. Others wept too, but some only watched Anaya with tight lips and narrowed eyes. That night, 2 women whispered at the well. By morning, the whispers had become declarations. She wandered too far. Broke the boundaries. She brought something back with her. Or perhaps she traded her gift. You know how they are, the ones born during the river season. By the 3rd day, people began to avoid her. The children stopped sitting with her under the fig tree near the market. Her friends turned their eyes away when she passed. Even her father, once so certain of her purity, watched her with a flicker of something unreadable. Her mother defended her loudly, but her words wilted against the growing tide of suspicion. The elders summoned her. She stood before them in the communal hut, surrounded by carved masks and ceremonial drums that hadn't been touched since the last naming festival. The air was heavy with incense and judgment. "Child," said Elder Tobe, his voice firm but sorrowful, "we ask only for truth. Did you go beyond the river bend?" Anaya nodded. "Did you speak to anything there?" She hesitated, then nodded again. Gasps rippled around the circle. A few elders stood abruptly. One spat on the ground. "Then you know what this means," said Elder Nwanika, eyes sharp as flint. "You crossed into spirit ground and brought something back. Your silence is not a curse on you, it's a shadow falling on us all." Anaya's hands flew up, gesturing wildly. She mimed a man, pointed to her throat, drew shapes in the air, none of it made sense. Her panic deepened as she saw only confusion in their eyes. Elder Tobe tried to understand, but the others grew impatient. "She invites spirits and speaks in riddles. This is how possession begins," someone muttered. "Silence is disease," said another. "We must cleanse it before it spreads." Anaya froze. She had never imagined her village, her people, could look at her the way they now did, like she was something rotting, something foreign. "We do not wish harm upon you," said Elder Nwanika, voice cold. "But we must protect the balance. Perhaps time away will purify you. Perhaps exile is mercy." Her mother protested, but her words drowned in the murmurs of agreement. It was as though the council had already made its decision, and her mother's voice, so fierce, so pleading, had become only background noise in a story already decided. And then, from the shadows near the back, another voice rose. Soft, cracked, but clear. "She is not cursed. She is called." Heads turned. An old woman stepped forward, wrapped in a faded shawl patterned with strange symbols. Her hair was long and silver, her eyes pale like washed-out sky. Some villagers shifted uncomfortably. Children stared. Others whispered her name. Mama Ojo. Long ago, she had been banished for speaking to spirits in dreams. She'd lived in the forest's edge ever since, seen only during planting and harvest festivals when she came for salt and millet. Few remembered her story. Fewer still dared approach her. "She met a spirit, yes," Mama Ojo said. "But not all spirits take. Some test. Some choose." Anaya blinked at her, wide-eyed. Mama Ojo stepped close and opened her hand. In her palm sat a small, polished shell. Iridescent. Humming faintly. "This will help you listen to what has been silenced. You have not lost your voice, child. It has only gone where your ears cannot follow." Anaya took it with trembling fingers. The shell pulsed once, warm against her skin. The elders said nothing. They could not argue with a woman already cast beyond their rules. But their silence was permission enough. That night, Anaya packed a small bag. Herbs. The shell. A water skin. No one stopped her when she passed the gates of Aji. She looked once behind her. Her mother stood by the path, face lit by the moon. She didn't speak. She only touched her throat, then her heart. Anaya nodded. And then she walked toward the forest. Toward the river bend. Toward the place where voices vanished, and perhaps could be reclaimed. The forest greeted Anaya like an old spirit exhaling. As she stepped past the river bend, past the crooked palm that marked the boundary no villager dared cross, everything behind her seemed to still. Even the wind retreated. The familiar trail faded beneath her feet like sand washing away under rising tide. The trees ahead grew denser, darker, twisted into shapes that had no memory of human hands. And in that first breath beyond the bend she knew, this was not the world she had left. This was the beginning of something older. She moved carefully, each step cushioned by layers of fallen leaves. The air smelled of wet roots and forgotten prayers. Around her, trees seemed to lean closer the farther she went. Their bark shimmered with a soft sheen, like skin sweating under fever. Once, she brushed a vine aside and it whispered her name, clear in a child's voice. She froze. The vine went still. But she did not turn back. There were no paths here, only choices. The ground curled and curved as if remembering ancient dances. Sometimes she saw two trees standing like gateposts, tall and twin, but when she passed between them the air grew heavy and her thoughts blurred. Time unraveled. A second might stretch into minutes. Minutes collapsed into blinking. The sun filtered strangely through the canopy, sometimes gold, sometimes blue. Shadows moved where no wind stirred. She clutched the shell Mama Ojo had given her. It pulsed faintly in her palm, warm and steady like a heartbeat. Every now and then, when her fear swelled too high, she held it to her ear, and heard a faint hum like a faraway lullaby. Deeper still she went, until she reached a clearing where the trees gave way to a single towering figure. It wasn't a tree, not entirely. The bark was wet with tears and faces moved across its trunk, shifting like dreams. Roots pulsed beneath the earth like veins. The spirit wept not from sadness, but from memory, endless, aching memory. This was the weeping tree, the guardian of forgotten things. Anaya stood at its base, unsure whether to bow or speak. She could do neither. The tree stirred. A low moan echoed from within its rings. "Why do you come, child of breath, with no voice to offer?" She lowered her head, opened her palm and showed the shell. "Seeking what was taken will cost you what you still hold. A path must be paid for." From deep within, a smaller voice echoed, Anaya's own years younger, singing her first lullaby beneath her mother's kitchen mat. It spilled into the air like honey, soft and warm. It twisted into the tree's branches and vanished. Her throat constricted. That song was joy, was memory, was her first belonging. But she nodded. The tree accepted. Its roots receded, revealing a narrow path hidden beneath layers of moss. Anaya stepped forward, heart bruised but determined. Beyond the clearing, the forest changed again. Stranger now. Softer. Yet more alive. A fox with the eyes of a grandmother crossed her path and bowed. A line of ghost antelope passed through a clearing, hooves never touching earth. They shimmered with the colors of firelight and moon shadow. Faces appeared briefly in the leaves, laughing, crying, murmuring stories she almost understood. Some she recognized. Ancestors. Spirit echoes. Others were older still, never named in her village's tales. She reached a stream unlike any she had known. The water ran clear but upward, defying the slope of the land. At its edge sat a water spirit, neither man nor woman, but fluid, shifting, clothed in shimmering scales that hummed softly. Its eyes held rivers within them. It did not speak with a mouth. Instead, it pointed to a large, flat stone beside the stream. Then to her heart. The riddle then. Anaya sat before the stone. Her fingers trembled. No voice, no words. Only her memory, her body, and what she had left. She took a shard of charcoal from her pouch and began to draw. Circles for the sound of breath. Spirals for the songs her mother used to hum. A broken line for the silence pressed into her chest. Then, the mark she had seen glowing on her throat the night her voice vanished. The spirit watched. She drew the man's face, not as it had been but as it had become. Eyes too wide. Smile too smooth. A shadow curling behind it. When she was done, the spirit leaned forward and touched the stone. The drawings lifted, turning into mist. The stream reversed its course, flowing backward for a heartbeat before stilling again. The spirit nodded once. The path opened. She walked on, the forest narrowing around her until trees gave way to stone. Moss turned to ash. Light dimmed. And then she saw it, the cave. It yawned open before her like a mouth mid-song. Carved into the rock were symbols older than language, and the air that flowed from within was cold, bitter, and filled with stolen breath. This was the throat of the earth, where voices were taken, and where she would take hers back. The air inside the cave was unlike anything Anaya had ever known, heavy, thick, and trembling with sound that didn't belong. Each step she took stirred something unseen. Whispers rose around her like mist curling over the ground, not loud, not sharp, but present, constant, urgent, mournful. They weren't words but fragments. Syllables searching for sentences. Echoes of songs cut short. Laughter that didn't know it had ended. The cave wasn't silent, it was saturated with stolen breath. As she moved deeper, the stone walls pulsed faintly with light. Faces, some human, some twisted into half-animal forms, blinked at her from the rock, embedded as if they had once tried to scream their way out. Mouths opened wide in silent agony. Eyes followed her. Tears ran like veins through the cave walls. Then she saw him. The man, or what had once worn the shape of one, stood near the center of the cavern, under a canopy of root-like stone dripping with glowing sap. But he was no longer the stranger who had lain bleeding under the fig tree. His form shimmered and shifted, One moment clothed in the flesh she remembered, the next cloaked in shadow, flickering like firelight reflected in a broken mirror. "You've come far, little voice," he said, turning toward her. His smile was too large. His teeth too many. Anaya stared, hands clenched, jaw trembling. "I hoped you would," he continued. "Not many do. Most lose themselves along the path. You though, you held on." He tilted his head. "How does it feel, walking the world with only silence for company?" She said nothing, of course. Could say nothing. But her silence was louder than his speech. He watched her a moment longer, then let the illusion fall. The flickers ceased. The man vanished. In his place stood something taller, older, wrapped in a cloak made of whispers. His eyes burned like coals, and around his throat hung tiny charms. Teeth, beads, broken bits of stone, and small, curled scraps of dried leaf covered in writing. Her skin crawled. She knew without needing to be told that those were once voices too. "I am Ekwu," he said finally, with the pride of one announcing the return of a king. "Forgotten god of roots and riddles. Traded away by men for newer things. Metal, fire, reason. But before they forgot me, they feared me. They worshipped me. Their children sang my name in the dark to keep the shadows at bay." He stepped toward her, the ground crunching underfoot though nothing visible lay there. "I was cast out," he whispered. "Not for evil. For hunger. I took voices not to destroy but to live. To remind the world that power begins in breath." She glared, jaw set, body shaking with rage she could not voice. "You gave yours freely," he said, eyes glittering. "You sang life into me when no one else dared. That song was a gift. A binding." He paused, then smiled. "But I am not cruel. I do not keep what is not mine." He lifted one long-fingered hand, and with it conjured a swirl of mist. It spun and twisted into a small orb of light that pulsed in the same rhythm as her breath. Her voice, suspended in air like a promise. "I will return it to you," he said, "if you help me. Be my voice in the world. A priestess to carry my name. Sing me into memory again. With your power I will not need to steal. You will worship me, and in return I will give you your sound." She stared at the orb. Her fingers twitched. Her body screamed with longing. But her heart screamed louder. She stepped back. Ekwu's face darkened. "You refuse?" Anaya reached slowly into her satchel and pulled out the enchanted shell Mama Ojo had given her. It pulsed faintly in her palm, humming with everything she had lost. He took a step forward, wary now. "What is that?" She held it up to him. The shell caught the cavern's strange light and swelled with it, growing brighter and hotter, a dull throb rising from its center. Then a crack tore through the silence. It screamed. Not a sound of terror, but a chorus of liberation. Voices poured out, hundreds, maybe thousands, howling, laughing, shouting their names. Songs exploded into the air like fire. The cavern trembled. The stone faces cried out in relief. Ekwu staggered back, hands over his ears. "No, no, I took them. They are mine." But the voices were fighting their way out. They stormed him, rushed through the air, pulled at the charms around his neck. The bits of soul he'd collected crumbled into dust. The orb holding Anaya's voice trembled, pulsed, then burst apart in a shimmer of golden breath. She inhaled. And the world shifted. She had her voice again, but not as it was. It had changed. It was louder than before. Older. And she was no longer afraid. Anaya stepped deeper into the throat of the earth, past the echo of freed voices still spiraling like birds released from cages. The air was thick now, not just with breath and power, but with choice. Ekwu had stumbled back into the shadows, wounded by what he had taken and could no longer keep. But she knew this wasn't over. Tricksters never vanished quietly. They slipped into cracks, waited, rebuilt. She would not give him the chance. She passed through a narrowing stone corridor, its walls narrowing like the throat of a great beast. At its heart, she found a space unlike the others, round, open, pulsing with memory. At the center sat a drum. Not an ordinary drum, but one of carved obsidian and polished wood, marked with symbols from a language older than fire. It rested on a mat of woven roots. It didn't hum. It didn't move. It waited. Patient. Expectant. She approached slowly. Her voice was hers again, but she did not speak. There was something deeper to be done. She knelt before the drum, remembering what Mama Ojo had whispered in her dreams. When voice fails, rhythm remembers. So she raised her hands and let them fall. The first beat was soft, barely a whisper against the skin of the drum. The second, stronger. The third, deeper still. She didn't beat it with rage or fear or even song. She beat it with memory. with the moment her mother first sang her name, with the silence that had stolen her days, with the ache of the children who had died when she could not sing, with the fire she had found in the forest. Her hands moved faster. The rhythm grew. It was not music. It was testimony. Each strike painted a piece of story in the air. Her fingers moved in a language of memory, one older than voice, patterns drawn from soul to skin to wood. She drew a spiral with one palm, echoing her mother's lullaby. A triangle with the edge of her hand, marking the village's sacred drumbeats. Then a line broken in two, her lost days. She closed her eyes. The shell pulsed in her pouch, responding to her rhythm, humming like a throat catching breath for the first time in years. The cavern grew warmer. The drum glowed faintly. The cave's roots began to quiver. Then the flame appeared. It started as a thread of light, rising from the cracks in the drum, then from the earth beneath her. It twirled upward, dancing without sound. The air shimmered. The earth exhaled. And from the center of the flame she emerged, the River Mother. She rose tall, crowned with waves, cloaked in fire, eyes filled with stars. Her hair floated like smoke, her voice thundered without sound, and in her gaze was the weight of everything Anaya had lost and everything she had become. The goddess stepped forward, barefoot on molten stone. Her presence pushed the air aside. Even the voices in the walls fell silent. "You called," she said, "not with sound but with presence. Not with voice but with truth." Anaya bowed, hands trembling, eyes burning. "You were warned," the goddess continued. "You crossed into the forest, gave your gift freely, and paid the price. Yet you came again. You did not beg for justice. You made it." Ekwa reappeared, trembling, no longer grand. He tried to retreat, but the River Mother reached toward him. "You who fed on breath, who fed on memory, who sang nothing and silenced many, your time ends." She pointed at his chest. His body convulsed. From his mouth, his eyes, his fingertips, threads of mist began to pour, each thread a voice, stolen and trapped. They screamed, wept, sang, thundered out of him in a storm of agony and release. One by one the voices flew free. Some raced to the cave's ceiling and disappeared like stars returning to the sky. Others circled Anaya, brushing her shoulders like wind. One lingered in her palm, warm, pulsing. Her voice. But it did not re-enter her like it had left. It swirled into her chest like flame licking dry wood. Her throat filled with something brighter than sound. She stood. And when she opened her mouth again, the world listened. "Enough," she said, and the cave shook. "Let this end," she whispered, and fire curled around her feet. Ekwu screamed as the River Mother pointed once more. His body twisted. His limbs turned to bark, his breath to wind. Roots burst from his feet, anchoring him where he stood. His skin cracked and split. Leaves grew from his fingers. His eyes turned hollow. And where the trickster had stood, a fig tree rose, its bark glistening with sap that wept like blood. Forever cursed to bleed for every voice it had stolen. The River Mother turned to Anaya, pride in her gaze. "You have become what even I could not shape alone," she said. "You are more than a voice giver now. You are a fire song. A bridge between breath and bone, silence and storm." Then the goddess was gone, fading into mist and ash, her work complete. Anaya stood alone again, but not truly alone. The cave now echoed with peace. The hollow fig tree stood still, forever weeping. And Anaya walked out of the cave not just with her voice, but with every story it had earned. When Anaya emerged from the forest of whispers, dawn had barely touched the world. The first light broke over the trees like the breath of a long-held prayer. Her body ached with every step, her spirit carried the weight of 100 voices, and her throat pulsed with a new kind of fire, not pain, not just power, but presence. She had crossed the veil between worlds and returned not as the girl who once sang under the moon, but as something older, something essential. She didn't speak as she re-entered the village. She didn't need to. The moment her feet touched the earth of her people's land, a hush fell across the huts, the drying mats, the cooking fires. Eyes turned. Doors opened. Children stilled. And then someone whispered, "She's back." Anaya walked to the center of the village, to the place where once she sang and later had stood in silence, accused. The same elders who had debated casting her out now rose from their stools, unsure whether to bow or flee. She simply stood and looked at them, not with anger but with understanding. She knew now the weight of fear, of misunderstanding, of lost traditions wrapped too tightly around brittle hearts. She took a breath. A long one. And then she sang. The sound was unlike anything the village had ever heard. Her voice did not simply fill the air, it changed it. Leaves turned in her direction. Ash in the fire pits shifted. The air stilled. The sick stirred in their hammocks. A child who had not walked in weeks sat up. An old man who had gone blind wept without knowing why. Her song was not just a melody. It was a calling back, of life, of balance, of memory. Her voice healed, yes, but it also reminded. The people remembered the stories they had let fade, the warnings they had called superstition, the forest paths they had paved over in fear. They remembered the rhythm of the old ways, not just the fear of spirits but the honoring of them, the balance. And they remembered Anaya. No longer just a gifted child. No longer just the girl who sang to soothe. She had become something else. A voice keeper. The elders, one by one, stepped forward. They laid down tokens before her, beads of their rank, carved amulets, woven rings. Not in apology. In respect. She nodded, accepting them without words. Her song had already spoken enough. In the days that followed, Anaya helped rebuild not just homes but faith. She walked to the sick, the grieving, the lost, and with a hum, a breath, a rhythm tapped gently on the ground, she brought peace. The forest rituals were rekindled. Offerings were placed at the edge of the trees. Drums sang again at dusk. Children were taught not to fear the forest, but to greet it with care. She visited Mama Ojo last. The old woman sat beneath her tamarind tree, peeling fruit with a rusted knife, as if she hadn't expected anything less. "You came back whole," she said, not looking up. "I came back changed," Anaya answered softly. Mama Ojo chuckled. "Same thing. Only people who've never been lost think they want to stay the same." Anaya sat beside her. "Did you know he'd come?" she asked. "I knew something would," the old woman said. "The forest always tests those who carry power and kindness in the same heart." They were quiet for a while, chewing fruit, listening to the wind. "Sometimes," Mama Ojo said, "you must lose a voice to learn to speak for more than yourself." Anaya nodded. She understood now. Her voice was never meant to belong only to her. It was not just for healing, but for remembering, for binding, for guarding the fragile line between human and spirit. That night, as the moon rose full and gold over the village, the children gathered around the fire. Anaya sat among them, her hair braided with beads of fireglass, her drum on her lap. They leaned close, wide-eyed, ready for a story. She didn't begin with, "Once upon a time." That was not how the old tales lived. She began with a single beat on the drum, the sound of breath finding form. Then her voice rose, weaving a tale of a girl who healed with song, who gave her voice to save a stranger, and journeyed into the throat of the earth to steal it back from a god of hunger. She told them of the river mother, of the trickster turned into a tree, of the shell that sang when no lips could. The children gasped, laughed, and leaned in closer with every word. Some clutched one another when she described the cave of voices. Others mimicked the rhythm on their knees. And when she finished, the fire had burned low, but their eyes were bright. Anaya looked at them, the future, the next singers, dreamers, and guardians, and smiled. She leaned close, voice soft now but heavy with power. "If you ever help a stranger in the forest," she said, "ask not just who they are." She paused. "Ask what listens when you speak." And the fire cracked, the wind answered, and the story became legend.